Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zilinskas.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's conversation is going to be centered around money and our behavior. Jenifer Sapel is going to be talking to us about why women still lack that financial confidence. She has a really amazing way of explaining how to manage your money for your past self, your present self, and your future self, and why the distinction is between creating wealth and earning wealth. Jenifer is a recovering overachiever who overcompensated financially after living with a mother who struggled financially after divorce. She started Utor Wealth after tiring of long-winded meetings and overemphasis on products and sales quotas. Utor is Latin for to use, to employ, and to enjoy. Jenifer believes that every dollar we touch and how we send it out into the world is shaping both the way we live in and the way we aspire to. Every woman deserves to do it intentionally and with confidence, which is exactly how she helps her clients. So stay tuned with this awesome conversation with Jenifer. Hey everyone, before we go into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that there is a free quiz that you can take on the nowomanleftbehind.com website. If you log on to the homepage and you scroll down just slightly, you're going to see a section that says, let's find out where you are in your career. If you click on the radio button that's called Take the Quiz, there will be a pop-up that comes up and it says, what's the key blocker in your career path? There are 3 key blockers that you may be operating under and you may not even know it. So if you click on just take the quiz, it's going to be about 10 questions. It really shouldn't take you more than 3 minutes. And then you're going to be able to get some additional resources just by taking the quiz. So remember, go to nowomanleftbehind.com to take the free quiz. For joining me today. So I'm going to start by asking you, so you're obviously an expert in the financial world, and I know that you say that women that are typically 40 to 55 now have their shit together and they still lack financial confidence. Why is that, Jenifer?
There's so many reasons for that, Rosie, but I'll give you just a couple. One is our culture is biased towards men when it comes to finances. And we see that in like media. There was a study done out of UK that looked at media messages, financial messages specifically geared for women versus financial messages geared for men. And in all of the messaging, they found that like 90% of financial messages to women were about like how to budget, right? Like, oh, don't spend too much, don't splurge, don't do this, how to cut back on lattes, that kind of thing. Where 75% of messages to men were things like make that big investment, right? It was like really encouraging them to invest and take ownership. Even like buying a watch was an investment in their career, or whatever the case is. So we're bombarded with external messages constantly telling us that we're not good with money. That's one. 2, we're tired. So I'm sure you've seen, and I'm sure that your audience can relate, like even women, and especially women who out earn their spouses, take more of the responsibilities and duties at home. So because we have this workload, whether it's a cognitive, we're the only ones thinking about birthdays and summer camps and things like that. Whether it's a cognitive load or a physical load, we're the ones actually doing more of the household work. Like something has to give. And a lot of times what shifts are those big investment and financial decisions. Those get left to, I hear like wildly successful, brilliant women say things to me all the time. Like I'm like a 50s housewife when it comes to finances. All the time. super common. And then the last thing that I'll say there is that the whole entire financial world, financial services industry, was built by men. So like all of its structures and the way that it's set up don't necessarily resonate with women, right? Our experience in the world, based on the last two things I just talked about, is different than a man's experience in the world. And so all of the services and the products are not really set up to be interesting and enticing to us in general.
Wow. That is a mouthful there, especially the marketing, right? Because you're right. I haven't heard marketing that geared toward men. Oh, you have to budget. You're absolutely right. It's more of like stock market investments, look at your portfolio, but we don't talk to women like that. And actually, I heard a statistic like years ago about if you have a couple and that financial planner does not establish a relationship with the wife, if the husband passes away, that female doesn't have that relationship, their bond. And I know a financial planner that makes it a point to every time they meet, he insists that, the spouse is there so that he can talk to both of them, because he realizes that it's important to build that relationship. So obviously you're extremely knowledgeable. So tell me a little bit about how you got into financial planning and your expertise, especially around women.
Yeah, for me, it started at home. When I was 10, my parents got divorced, and life before divorce was very comfortable financially, and life after divorce was not. So my mom struggled financially after divorcing my dad. And that, as the oldest daughter, I was like an overachiever, right? And perfectionist. I call myself a recovering perfectionist now. I just looked at that and I was like, no, I'm just not. No, I'm not going to do that. So I was always, from a very young age, interested in just financial independence in general. And then financial services actually hunted me down. It wasn't something that I saw myself doing. I always thought I was going to be an attorney. Like I could see myself arguing in court. But what happened instead was I was managing a gym. I was also an athlete, so very into anything with mobility. And I was managing a gym after college, and one of my members was like, have you ever thought about doing what I do? And I was like, no, that seems boring. And he was like, why don't we have lunch? Like, let's just talk about what that means. And so at lunch, what he told me was, it's so cool because we show people, here's how to make college funding happen for your kids. And then when their kids go to college, we get invitations for that. And I was like, okay, that is cool. Like, that's cool. Tell me more. So here I am 20 years later. And what I've just in the last year or two really been able to connect with is that what I love about financial services is that money touches every aspect of our life.
Absolutely.
And so I get to be a person that's like, how do I make these really hard times in your life easier? Like, how can I eliminate money in the conversations where life gets really hard? And how do we use money so that you really can celebrate the high points of life? Like, that's why I get excited about Mondays.
Yeah. Well, listen, I can certainly relate to your story because I was the divorcee, and I was actually working full time, and my husband at the time was staying home with the kids, and we went through a really bad divorce. It took me 4 years to get divorced. So I was one of the lucky ones that actually went to trial. What happened was afterwards, Jenifer, I was broke. I had nothing. It was a bad situation. So I had to leave in the middle of the day. So I left with nothing. And, one of the things that I'm really proud of is I started from scratch at 40. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the things that I do now is because at 40, I got sole custody of my kids. They were 4 and 6 at the time. And at the time, I was kind of waiting for someone to say, hey, do you want to be promoted? And then when I finally said something was because I had these 2 little kids to take care of. And one thing was very clear. I needed to make it happen. I needed to make more money to take care of them, because when I got out of college, my parents didn't have any money. I was first generation. And I remember one time desperately calling my mom. I'm like, Mom, do you have $50? Because I need to eat. And so I was bound and determined that when my kids got out of college, they were not going to have any debt. And I was already starting at 40 with zero because I had nothing, and then rebuilding. And by gosh, it has been a crazy ride. And I remember like budgeting down to the penny, and it's so important to be aware, but I didn't look at it from an investment perspective. So I know that you generally, to the audience, I generally ask for 2 tips at the very end, but we're going to switch it up today, and we will repeat those 2 tips at the end, but we're going to start with those 2 tips. So why don't we start with those 2 tips, Jenifer, so that we can get into the guts of the conversation and why this is so important for women, especially in the corporate world, that are working so hard and they're not able to advance in their careers as fast as they would like to.
I would love to. And before I start, I just want to say, Rosie the rock star, thank you so much for sharing that. And like, wow, good for you. And I have chills, just like you did it, and you bet on yourself, and you invested in yourself, and you asked for your needs to be met. And we live in a culture that says women are here to serve other people. That is our value, is to be of service to our spouses, to our employers, to everybody else. And we don't hear enough. You cannot be of service to anybody if you're not first in service to yourself. And so I'm so impressed.
Oh, thank you.
Way to go, Rosie the rock star. So my first actionable tip is exactly in line with your story and what you just said, is to be financially confident in your own personal finances. So whether you have a partner or not, know your personal financial numbers. And being financially confident does not mean that you have to know anything. Like, it doesn't mean you have to be an expert like me. It means that you need to know the income that's coming in. Sorry, you don't need to know anything about finances, right? Specifically. What it does mean is you need to know the money that's coming into your household on a monthly basis, and you need to know the money that's going out of your household on a monthly basis. And you need to be really comfortable with those numbers. You need to be really comfortable with, like, okay, after taxes and benefits and things like that, this is the amount that gets deposited into my account, whatever interval that is. You need to know how much you're roughly, like how much it takes to live, how much you're spending on housing and food and transportation and childcare. And the more comfortable you are with those numbers, the more powerful you're going to be in any of your career conversations. Like you mentioned in your story, Rosie, right? You said it wasn't until I was like, I have to be able to support myself, and I have to be able to provide for my kids in a different way. So I have to make more money. And you knowing that about your personal situation drove, right, more powerful conversations in your career development. And I think for people who are listening today, if they don't have as strong of drivers that you have, you know, there's some of us that are like, I don't really know what I want, right? I'm not really sure. That's okay too. The more you get to understand, this is what I want, this is what's important to me. If you came across, let's say you're dreaming about the dream house on Zillow, and you see like, wow, that's a beautiful house. Like, really get intimate with, this is what the mortgage would be on that dream house. And if I know what my monthly cash flow looks like, can I afford that mortgage or not? And if the answer is no, then again, just like you had kids to take care of and things like that, now you have a dream mortgage number to hit. When you go into your performance review conversations, you can say, like, I need an 8% raise, right? And you can know, you don't have to tell them, it's so that I can afford the mortgage on my dream house. But if you know that and you're grounded in that, you're going to be much more effective in your career conversations.
I love that. So was that the first tip then?
The first tip is be financially confident. If you're financially confident in your personal finances, then you will be more confident in your career trajectory.
Yeah, I like that, because I like the way you said that very concretely. So if you know that getting that mortgage is going to be an 8% increase to your expenses, then obviously you're going to have to increase your income by 8%. So it does give you that power. So that is very powerful. Okay, so what's the second tip?
The second tip is be really grounded in your financial principles and super flexible in your methods. So I know that sounds like, woo-woo. So I'll give you an example again. If retirement or financial independence is a priority for you at some point, then of the income that comes in, you're going to enjoy most of it, but some of it you have to put aside for your future self, right? So you're putting aside for a future date where someday you don't have to work,
Mm-hmm.
The principle there is financial independence. That's the thing that we're trying to accomplish. That's the priority. That's what's important to us. The methods are you're investing in the stock market. So if you're putting money aside and you're putting money into the stock market, great. It's to accomplish this certain goal. If 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you decide, I don't really like investing in the stock market, I'd rather invest in real estate, and you switch from investing in stocks and bonds to real estate, that's fine. That's the method. So you can be flexible in your methods, but don't be flexible in your principles. And that, I love, what I like about that principle, especially for women, is we're constantly wondering if we're doing the right thing and second guessing ourselves and wondering, like, are you sure?
Yes.
There's no right answer. If you're sure about your principle, all of your methods can be flexible.
Absolutely. I'm assuming you're familiar with Susie Orman. She obviously does a lot of financial education and training and stuff like that for women. Now, Susie's rule of thumb to have your emergency fund is, I think it used to be like 6 to 9 months. Now I think she extended because of the pandemic, like 9 to 12 months. Mm-hmm. And when someone is not happy in their job and they go talk to their manager and they're like, you know what, I want to do something different now. And if they do have the emergency fund, how does that position them to have that conversation with their manager?
Again, in any negotiation, like one of the most powerful things you can have in a negotiation is the ability to walk away. The ability to say, like, we're not coming to an agreement and that's fine with me. This isn't going to work and I'm going to go find something else. So if you have 6 months, 9 months, 12 months in the savings, and you know you can find employment somewhere else that's going to be a better fit, when you walk into that conversation, again, just that knowledge is going to be a powerful negotiation tool.
So the tip number 2, when you were saying your financial principles, I would assume that when someone has that nest egg, that emergency money for when you lose your job or someone gets hurt or all that stuff, that would be considered, would that be considered a principle for you to have that nest egg? Let's talk a little bit about what are some principles that people have when it comes to money.
Beautiful. Perfect. I'm glad you asked. So the first principle, I would say, like financial mechanical principles, be intentional with your cash flow is number 1. So again, the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. You are the only person who can decide, beyond the number in terms of finances, what your other principles are. For example, a principle for me is I have to find meaning in my work. Like I can't show up to a job that's not meaningful. That's a principle for me. That's not for my husband. My husband doesn't have to, he derives his meaning outside of work. For him, it's more important to have a type of job that's like flexible, that's intellectually engaging, but he loves to shut it off at work, right? And then like find his meaning outside of work. So be intentional about your cash flow from a number standpoint. Just means like, this is the amount I need to earn or I want to earn annually or monthly. And you're being intentional about how much is coming in every month and how much is going out every month and what it's going out to every month. So that's principle number 1. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Number 2 is part of your point is to manage your big risks. So when it comes to finances, everybody's kind of afraid of, there's a lot of things to be afraid of, frankly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the real, like, big financial risks, like the big scary monsters that are actually really easy to address. Number 1 is death. We're all going to die at some point. If you have kids or if you have anyone who depends on you financially, life insurance is a major financial consideration. So if you couldn't be here, but people still are going to need money beyond your lifetime, then you should absolutely be considering life insurance. So death is a big risk. Divorce is a big risk, as you know. Disability is a big risk. Unemployment is a big risk. And lawsuits are a big risk. And with all of those things, with all 5 of those things, for the most part, your best lines of defense are legal documents and insurance policies. With unemployment, it's the savings account. So that one's like the having 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And that, for me, that's a method that can be flexible. Having 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months really depends on what is your level of comfort and what is your income flow look like, right? Like some people get big bonuses every quarter or annually or things like that. And so they may want a bigger pool, right? Because they may miss out on a bonus if something happens. Some people, if you've got, like the higher up you are into the C-suite, usually the longer the job search can take. So again, you may want a bigger pool of money. That really comes down to comfort. I'll pause there. What questions
That
about?
makes a lot of sense. And it's so funny. So I have a kind of faux pas story. So I've had a term life insurance for 20 years, and this year it's expiring this year. And my daughter's 22, my son is 24. They're both gainfully employed, but we're starting to separate. Like I'm trying to you guys pay for your phones and all that stuff. And we're not there yet, but we're in the process of separating. So I accidentally let my policy lapse last October because I thought I had it on auto pay. I could have sworn I had it on auto pay. So then I got a letter like in November saying your policy lapsed. I was like, what? What do you mean? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, like maybe I shouldn't renew it. I was like, if I die between now and next October, I'm going to be so mad because my kids are going to lose on, all this money. So I had to reapply. I had to fill out the application. And I figured, for a term life, it was like $270. It was something menial. And I was like, oh, they're just going to go ahead and reinstate it. No, the company, so I filled out a whole application, another questionnaire. They reviewed all my stuff. I had to submit some additional documents. They sent someone out to do the whole medical test. And I was like, you guys have spent so much money for $270, but then, obviously if I die, they're going to pay a lot more money. And it was just weird, the whole situation. But I told my kids, I was like, okay, you guys are good till October. After that, I'm done because I'm not renewing my life insurance for them. They are now working and they're independent and all that good stuff. So, and obviously I have other financial stuff that they'll get if I die, but that's just a lesson for, I just didn't pay attention and that whole thing happened. And I was like, well, I considered letting it go. I was like, no, let's just do the responsible thing. But to your point, what are some recommendations that you, or I should say, what are some things that you talk to your clients about all the time that maybe our audience could actually think about today that I was like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that. And obviously death is one for a spouse and divorce is the other one. So I really want to kind of talk about divorce. Like, how can women protect themselves when they're married and money is commingled and stuff like that? And so I'll leave it there.
Okay. We could spend the rest of the time just talking about this. So you tell me how much or how little you want to know. With your situation, one of the common things, so another takeaway is I would tell anybody who's listening right now, put a note on your calendar for an annual review with yourself every year for your insurance policies. And one of the easiest and best times to do that is during open enrollment. So if you're working right now and you have open enrollment where you have to, decide, make some of those decisions, make that a time where you're actually carving out enough space where you can really think through these things. Make sure that your life insurance is still good. Update the beneficiary, because some of the things I've seen are that ex-spouses are still listed as beneficiaries on policies. Something I saw just last year. I had a client who was divorced and then several years later remarried. And when we reviewed her coverages, I was like, your son is listed as a beneficiary. Is that on purpose? And she's like, oh, no, I just listed him while we were divorced, right? It should be my, my new spouse. So good catch. So put some time in your calendar to review all of your insurance coverages and all of your beneficiaries and do that once a year. When it comes to divorce. So the thing about divorce is that the state that you live in already has decided how the division of your assets will go if and when you get divorced. And so a lot of times the conversation about a prenuptial agreement, or you can even do a postnuptial agreement. So a document that happens after you're married that says, look, while we're healthy and while this relationship is still good, let's decide now how we would split everything, in the event of a divorce. And that decision's already been made for you. So really a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement just gives you the opportunity to say, we don't necessarily agree with the state or we want the state to decide. We're just going to decide ourselves and say, look, how would we amicably split this thing should that occasion ever arise? So a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement, again, a legal document, that's one of your best defenses. Another best defense is to be aware, again, be financially confident in your household finances. So it's okay to have division of labors. It's perfectly fine for one person to be more in charge of paying the bills and the other person to be more in charge of how the investments are made. What isn't okay is for one party to be completely oblivious to what's happening in either of those scenarios.
I agree.
So, do you find any surprises in your divorce?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's really common, Rosie. So like what you experienced in divorces is really common. I think it's something like 80%, whether it's through divorce or death. And here's the other reality. The reality is all relationships end.
That's true.
All of them end. They're either going to end through divorce or through death. They're all going to end at some point. So at some point, one person in that relationship is going to be solely responsible for finances, even if just temporarily. So again, you can have things divided and you can have day-to-day tasks that are divvied up, but once or twice a year, you need to come together and make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of what's happening on monthly bills and budgeting and things like that, and what's happening with longer term investments and those kinds of other things. So that nobody's surprised when the day will come. You will have to take care of this yourself at some point. Statistically, it's the woman who is going to have to take care of finances because men die before the women do. And again, if you become divorced, you're going to have to do it anyway. So statistically speaking, if you're a woman on this call, whether you want to or not, you probably will be solely responsible for your finances at some point. The other thing that should happen that's a best practice is that both partners pull credit reports annually and review them together. And what you'll see on credit reports are credit card bills that have been racked up that you may not know about, or other kinds of liens. So I have seen that before. I've seen spouses that were surprised they didn't know that their spouse had a gambling problem until it came up on a credit report. I've seen a husband die and a wife surprised that his business had not been paying his excise tax. And so it was a six-figure state excise tax bill due.
Wow. Holy camole. One of the things that my siblings, so I'm one of 5 kids. And, my parents, they were just never good with money or, whatever happened. But one of the things that I told my siblings about 5 years ago, I was like, we need to help mom and dad get their estate together. So we put everything into a trust. And then between one of my sisters and I, we took care of all of their final expenses. So as much as my other siblings that were like, I don't want to talk about this, I'm like, I do. Because you know what? I don't want to get the phone call that something happened to mom or dad. And then now we have to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Like, where are they going to be buried? Like, what's going to happen with the house? When there's money and there's siblings and there's property to be sold, things happen. So I was like, I want everything in writing. I do not want any surprises on who's going to get what. So we have it all spelled out. And all of their final expenses are done and paid for. And we actually went to a different funeral about a year ago, and my sister and I went and checked out their headstone because their headstone is ready, like their plot, all that stuff, because I don't want to worry about that stuff. I want to grieve. I want to be, just present in the moment. And I know this sounds morbid, but at the same time, I don't want to be having to pick out a casket when my parents are, when something happens to them. So
I don't think it sounds morbid at all, Rosie. And again, Rosie the rock star. Congratulations. You're somebody who gets hard things done. You are a get shit doneer. So thank you for that. Society doesn't run without people like you. I don't think that's morbid at all. In a perfect world for me, I think again, there's cultural failures that we have. I would love what you just went through, that whole process you just went through with your parents. I would love it if that was just part of our normal culture. If we think about like when people are born, there's baby showers and there's reveal parties, right? There's all these rituals around coming together, identifying what's needed, right? Mothers sit around and be like, this was critical. This was critical. This was critical. Don't waste your money on this. Don't waste your money on this. Don't waste your money on this, right? So we have like cultural norms around the beginning of life we have completely failed on the end of life. And like, how cool would it be if we lived in a place where all that stuff you just did, what could be more like a baby shower, right? More like, oh, now we've reached the point where we've got to get together as a family and be like, hey, it was a huge celebration when you came into the world. We want to be able to celebrate your life when you leave the world. And yes, to your point, we need to have the space to grieve.
Well, I've seen it. I have a very large family. I'm 100% Mexican. My mom is one of 10 siblings. And by the way, they're all still alive, all 10 of them in relatively good health. I think the oldest one is like 92. The youngest one is like 60 something. So I have seen where deaths have started to happen in our family and people aren't prepared. And I was like, oh, heck no. And so when I did start the conversation with my siblings, two of them were like, I don't want to talk to mom and dad about that. I'm like, well, I will. I'll ask the hard questions because you have to have I mean, like you said, we're all going to die. It's not something that you can hide from.
Yep. Well, and you and I, we're the kind of people that like, we like to take the hard things and just get them over with. Not everybody's like that, and that's okay. What I tell my clients in this kind of scenario is it's okay if that conversation takes time and it looks more like a process than it does a project. So like the first time that you talk to your parents about it, you might get a lot of resistance, but let them think about it. Tell them that's what you'd like to accomplish. Tell them, you know, if it takes us a year or it takes us 2 years, that's okay. But I just want to get that process started now. And give them some time to catch up to you as a driver, to be like, okay, I've thought more about it. I've thought about the one question and here's what we want to do for that. I've thought about this and this is what we want to do with that.
And you're absolutely right. It is a process because when we actually went to the funeral home and we said we're trying to be proactive, first of all, they were like, thank you. The funeral director actually said, thank you for doing this. And then he gave us these big booklets. One for my mom, one for my dad. And I was doing this whole process by myself. And then I was like, I can't do this by myself because there's just too much. So I enlisted my second sister that we're both kind of like right along the way with all this stuff. And so between the both of us, we sat down with our parents and did all that stuff. So it is a process. So that's a good point. Now, obviously, you know that all financial things boil down to cash flow and net worth. And everything else is noise. So let's talk about the noise. Like, what are some things that are noise when it comes to money?
I think it's best summarized under like, there's all the methodology. So like, where should I be saving? How should I be saving? How much should I be saving? How should I be investing? What kind of account should I be investing in? What kinds of things should I be investing in? What's a good interest rate? What's a good mortgage? What's a bad mortgage? Should I lease a car? Should I buy a car? All of those things. Like every financial decision and every article that you could possibly read, I would say all of that is methodology. All of them have a time and a place. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Mm-hmm. When you want to know, is this a financial decision that I should do? Ask yourself, how does this impact my cash flow? So if we take like buying a house as an example, buying a house and having a mortgage payment, that probably increases, right, your monthly payment to household expenses. You're also going to have to maintain the house and pay property taxes and, you know, replace the dishwasher when it breaks, those kinds of things. So that's how it impacts your cash flow. So like, again, be really comfortable. Know this is how it's going to impact my cash flow. Then ask, how does this impact my net worth? So if we go back to a net worth is a financial buzzword. So some people, when I say that, that's like, I have no idea what that means. So I'll take a step back and explain. Net worth means if you write down everything you own on the left side of the paper. So I've got $5,000 in my checking account. Maybe you have a house and it's worth $500,000, right? Whatever it is, everything you own on the left side of the paper, the balance of all of your accounts, and any other asset that you could sell tomorrow that has value. That's usually just a house for the most part, unless it's a business, right? Or rental property. So everything you own, what's that total? And then on the right side, put everything you owe. So if you owe credit card debt, if you owe student loans, if you owe a mortgage, any other kind of debt, that's what you owe on the right side. And when you subtract what you owe to other people from what you own, that number is your net worth. And if you're right out of college and you own nothing, and you have a bunch of student loan debt, you're going to have a negative net worth. Perfectly normal. That's perfectly normal. It's not any reason to panic. It's just a number That's just where you are today. So then when we go back to the noise conversation, how does this impact my cash flow? How does this impact my net worth? Well, when you buy a house, that usually means you're going to increase your net worth, right? The day that you buy it, it's usually a neutral, even if you wrote a check. So if you write a check for your down payment, that money went from your checking account into your house. That's a neutral thing on net worth, right? Because now you have that much equity in your house. And then for the long run, a house is going to grow your net worth.
Right.
Because historically, that home value nationally increases by 4%. That's very, very specific, right, to where you live geographically. But the national average is 4% every year. So over time, you buy a house, that house is going to increase in value by 4% each year. That means that it's growing your net worth number by 4% each year. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. Now, for those that don't know, that maybe are just out of college listening today, what is equity?
So equity in your house is the amount of the property that you own. So let's say, again, you have a $500,000 house, and whether it's your own accord or you had help with a down payment, let's say you put $25,000 down on that $500,000 house, your equity in that house, and you took a loan out for the rest, right? So you have a $500,000 property, you put $25,000 down, but the rest of that $500,000 property, technically the bank owns, because they lent you the money for that piece of property. The $25,000 you have, that is your equity. So if you sold it 6 months from now or a year from now, first the bank gets paid off, and then you get access to your portion of that property value. In my example, you get that $25,000 back, and perhaps if the value had grown, that $25,000 has also grown.
Now, there's also something that you talk about, of course, if you aren't good with money, being good with money is a set of skills. So are there any other specific things? So for example, if someone is just starting out in their career and they're in a negative, what are some recommendations then that you can talk about where they can swing that pendulum? Because obviously I'm out of college, like you said, I own nothing, but I have, $50,000 in college debt, and I get a job making $50,000 a year. Like, what are some things that I could do to get rid of that debt, or do I invest? Like, what are some thoughts for those young people?
Great question. So it's really simple. So you get out of college and you're making $50,000 a year and you have student loan debt. The number one, and like all the people who are the most financially confident, it has nothing to do with how much they're making. It has to do with, regardless of how much they're making, they're setting some amount of it aside for their future self. So that's one of the most critical first things to do to get on a good financial trajectory. If you're making $50,000 a year, make sure that $5,000 of that a year is set aside for your future self, and $45,000 of it you're enjoying your life today, and a portion of that you're paying for your past self, which your college loan debt.
Yeah. I love the future self and the past self references. That's great.
Yeah, it's kind of your 50, right? You have some of it going to your past self, which is your college loan. You're enjoying the bulk of it, and you're putting some away for your future self. People get hung up on trying to pay off that past self as fast as possible. And what I would say is the way the numbers work out, if you're putting money away for your future self, and if you're putting away for your future self for a really long period of time. So let's say you're 22 and that $5,000 a year in our example is for your retirement self, because you're putting that $5,000 in a Roth IRA. It'd be a great potential move. That's money that you're not going to access for 20, 30, maybe 40 years. Because of that length of time, compounding interest on that length of time is almost always mathematically going to work out better than paying off your past self.
Oh, wow.
Even if your future self money is only earning 4% and your past self money is costing you 6%, because of the variable of time, because that future self money is for 40 years, almost always mathematically, it's better to put away for your future self than it is to worry too much about your past self.
Interesting. So I'm assuming you also know Dave Ramsey, and the 7 baby steps. So he says, pay off it with gazelle intensity. If I have disposable money, you're saying that I should still put in my Roth IRA and then pay whatever else I have left over for my loans.
Yep. And Dave Ramsey is in that assumption with that piece of education he's giving. The assumption, he's assuming that you're not going to be disciplined enough, A, to invest in your future self, and B, to keep that money invested in your future self. So if that's true, if you're the kind of person that, like, if I see an account balance, I'm going to take it out and I'm going to use it, right? A year from now or 2 years from now. If that's true, then that piece of advice is correct. It's better. It's better just to get rid of your debt first and then work on your present self and your future self. But if you're a disciplined person and you can set that money aside and leave that money aside, again, for that length of time, mathematically, it works out better for you to be investing in your future self simultaneously while you're paying off your debt. Not either or, you're doing both.
I love that. So I think I definitely did that when I was younger because the company that I work for gives you a certain amount of matches, right? So I always said at minimum, do the matching. So if they match 3%, do 3%. If they, whatever. So I did it right, so that's good.
Well, and the other way I like to think about it is if you think about like with the past, present self, if you think about it as who are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing your future self or are you prioritizing your debtors? Like you're earning money. Like, who do you want to take better care of? Because, like, they're happy getting their minimum monthly payment. If you prioritize your future self and what you want, and you can stick to those priorities, you're better off. And there's some point where there's a crossover where you've got enough money saved and invested that if you wanted to just write a check and be done with the debt, you could.
Gosh, that makes so much sense. I love the who are you prioritizing, your debtors or your future self? It's just, that's incredible.
Prioritize yourself. Again, it's a women thing, right? Like you feel an obligation to everybody else first.
Yeah.
And like everything we've talked about today is like the starter kit level, like the really advanced thinking around debt is that debt and money are the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know that you have knowledge about Harry Markowitz, who's a Nobel Prize winner, and he created the modern portfolio theory, but even he doesn't invest a certain way. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Harry Markowitz won a Nobel Prize for modern portfolio theory, I think in the 50s, maybe the 60s. And he's kind of like that research has really shaped the way that we invest today. And the simplest way to describe it is he's the one who said, if you're looking for a 6% rate of return, as an example, if you're hoping for a 6% rate of return, the way to achieve that 6% rate of return is to invest 60% of your money in stocks and 40% of it in bonds. And that is efficient. That's the most efficient route because it will achieve your goal at the lowest amount of risk. So it's like taking just enough risk to meet your goal and not any more risk than you need to take to hit that goal. But Harry Markowitz himself is on record saying he doesn't invest that way. So we like to bring that up just in the context of, again, everybody thinks there's all these like rules that we don't know, that it's a game that we don't know how to play the game for. And even the Nobel laureate, Harry Markowitz, wrote the rules and he doesn't play the game by his own rules.
That's so interesting. Now, you also describe financial services industry as a bad pair of jeans, ill-fitting and uncomfortable. I love that analogy. So why is that? So
I think it's more just that it feels unapproachable, right? That like people tell me all the time, I don't know if I need an advisor and I'm afraid to talk to an advisor. I don't even know what questions to ask an advisor. And so that's where we use the jeans analogy. Like, not every pair of jeans is for everybody, right? Everybody has a different body shape. Everybody has a different level of comfort. Everybody has a different level of style. So you have to try them on to know whether or not it's a good fit. And if you meet with an advisor and you're like, this is uncomfortable, that's your sign. This is not a good fit. So just keep trying on jeans, right? I don't know about you, Rosie. It takes me forever to find the right pair of jeans.
Absolutely.
Like it's exhausting. It's a couple hours in a changing room. I don't really love it, right? but I spend the time because it's worth it. I want to find a comfortable pair of jeans that is stylish and looks good on me.
It looks cute, and you know what? It's such a huge difference when you put on a pair of clothing where you feel good, though your disposition is so different. So same thing, especially like the example of the elder couple where both are not meeting with the financial planner. That's why 9 out of 10 times the financial planner loses that customer because they never made a relationship with that woman. So that is so key. I love that. If it doesn't feel comfortable, then seek another financial planner, because eventually you will find a financial planner that is able to meet your needs in a comfortable, conversation.
Yeah, it's your style, right? Like if you want to talk about like the hard life experiences and the stories and the messy stuff and the mushy stuff and the emotions, then you should be able to talk about that with your advisor. If you're just like, just tell me what to do, that's a whole different style, right?
Well, and when you're a financial planner, I mean, I don't think it's almost kind of like insurance. Like, I need to know what's happening in your world so that I can provide you with the best insurance products. If you don't tell me that you own 3 houses and you're only going to talk about your one house, then I can't help you. So it's the same thing with financial planning. Yeah. Now, obviously, we've already talked a lot about, women and their mindset, but why do you think is like the number one reason that they avoid talking about money?
Shame.
Oh, I hate that answer. So say more about that. What do you mean, like shame in what way?
So many ways, but where I see it show up with money more than anything else is people come to me and feel like they should know more than they do. And they're ashamed. I'm ashamed that I don't know more about money than I do right now. And there's no reason to be ashamed about not knowing about money. There's nothing, again, there's no mechanics in our culture. In fact, our culture, there's surveys that show people would rather talk about death than money. We don't talk about money. And money is a skill, right? So I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and becoming a mother humbles you in a lot of ways. One of the ways is it really shows you how everything is learned. Right? Kids do not know how to use a spoon. You have to teach them how to use a spoon. So like, if you don't know how to use money, you've never been taught how to use money. It is a life skill, and you can't just read about it, right? You can't just read about how to use a spoon. You can't read about how to drive a car. You actually have to use the spoon, and it's going to be messy and you're going to screw up. Same with driving a car. The first time you get behind a car, the first time you have to parallel park, you're terrified.
Yep.
The more and more and more you do it, the better you get at it. And money is the same way. So I could go on and on forever about shame, but I think that's we can stop there unless you want to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's just, it's such a shame that women are ashamed to talk about money. It's just ridiculous. But this is why you and I do the work that we do. So you obviously help women in their finances, and I'm here having this conversation today because I want women in the corporate world to understand that they can take their power back by managing the money and not letting the money manage themselves or manage them. And I think that's so critical, because if you don't pay attention and think that it's just going to happen all on its own, that's not the case. You actually have to be intentional on how you manage money. And same thing with when you need to make more money and you're working, you either need to ask for a raise, apply for a promotion, go to another company, change jobs, but you have to take massive action. And it's going to be a process. It's not going to be a once and done thing. And even with the asking your manager for a raise, you're probably not going to get a raise if you go in there, day one and say, I need a raise. Like you said, it's probably going to be a process. You're going to go in there and say, hey, you know what? I was thinking about different ways of, contributing. Like, how can I help you meet your goals? Because if I help you meet your goals, then you're going to help me meet my goals, right? So you have to be strategic in the way that you approach the situation. And so at the very beginning, you were talking about those principles. That's almost like your core values. So you have to work on distinguishing, or I should say, unveiling what your core values are so that you can figure out where you want to put your attention and your energy. And
Yeah.
so, gosh, we have talked so much about such amazing information here. So I'm curious, Jenifer, how do you, or do you even have conversations with young people that are like kind of coming into the workforce, say maybe no more than like 5 or 10 years? And what is like the one piece of advice that you always tell those young people?
I think my general advice is boring and vanilla and is in line with what we've talked about today. And that is like manage your cash flow and set aside money for your future self. And don't stress too much about where, again, that's a method about where you're putting that money aside. If you're managing your cash flow and putting money aside for your future self, get to a point where eventually, like your kind of target is 20% of your income is being set aside to your future self. Don't beat yourself up for starting at 1%. 1% is a perfectly acceptable starting point. So I'm like, anybody who can manage their cash flow and get to a point where you're setting aside 20% of your income annually, you're going to be in good financial shape. Everything else is a process. So, like we've talked about with everything, you don't have to learn everything at once. You're not going to learn it by reading it in a book. You're going to learn it over time as you pay more attention and ask more questions and learn and grow as you go. But I will say, like, the one piece of advice, if I could give myself as a 20-something in my career trajectory, would be to eliminate the word earn. So like I'm earning my career money, I'm earning my bonus, I'm earning my wealth, and replace it with create.
Oh, I like that.
And the reason for that, and again, women are horrible at this, right? This is why women think we have to meet 100% of job requirements before we apply. So earning implies that you have to put in a lot of effort to do it, and you're creating wealth, you're creating value in your company. And I know so many 20-somethings listening to your podcast are working their tails off thinking they have to earn every penny that they're making. And the reality is that they are making that money and they're making all of their potential future raises and things like and promotions because of who they are, because of their perspective, because of their creativity, because them being on the team is creating value for the team, not because they're working their ass off, right? Working your ass off doesn't hurt, but it isn't a mandate. You can make a ton of money without working your ass off.
I love that. And I'm actually going to change a couple of things in just my content and my conversation, because I have used the word earn, but create is so much better, because you're absolutely right. They are creating whatever job they have. They're contributing, they're creating, and
and creating value does not necessarily mean earning, right, and busting your butt.
I love that. That is so key. All right. So we are at the end of our conversation. So can we quickly recap the 2 tips then that we talked about at the beginning?
And I added the bonus third with create. Yeah.
Yes.
The first one was to be financially confident in your personal finances, right?
Okay.
And that doesn't mean knowing everything. It just means comfortable in your ability to navigate it. So comfortable with your personal financial numbers. And then 2 is to learn and be grounded in your principles and be flexible in your methods. So your methods can change. Don't sweat it. They will change. You don't know everything that you're going to want to do now or in the future, right? With your financial decisions, worry about your principles first and your methodologies as they go.
Those are excellent tips. And I think there's 2 things that I'm going to take away from this conversation. The first one is, who are you investing in? Your past your past self or your future self, meaning debtors, credit card, any school debt, anything like that, or 401k investments, that kind of thing. And then the second one is what we just talked about, earn versus create. I mean, those are 2 very impactful things. And I think this has been such a powerful conversation because we brought up so many things that women generally don't talk about, which is why we're having this conversation. But thank you so much, Jenifer, for being here today. Any final words, Jenifer?
I'd say you got it. Like, you are your own best investment. So never, ever be afraid to invest. And Rosie, you are an amazing host and an amazing human, and Rosie the rock star.
Jenifer shared with us that we can become more financially confident. One of the things that really resonated with me is she talked about being able to save for your future self and pay for your past self simultaneously, meaning that you can invest for your Roth IRA at the same time that you are paying off your debt, whether it's credit cards, student loans, or whatever. And I think that's genius because, again, I've heard other people say, just focus on paying off your debt, but then you're not really investing for your future self. So that is tip number one. And then tip number two, she says, to learn to be grounded in your principles and flexible with your methods. So the methodology is creating a budget and using different apps and doing all the things, but you really need to be clear on your principles, which I know as your core values, so that you can be clear on your principles and then you can be flexible in your method. So 2 amazing tips. All of Jenifer's contact information is going to be on the episode website. So go there to get her contact information. And with that, I hope that this was really helpful to you because I want you to have that financial freedom. But again, you have to be brave, be bold, and take action.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.